Hello my friends, and welcome back to Player Display. So, as I've been saying for the past several videos that we've done, I'm going to, again, do something that's a little bit different, and this time it will not be toy related. I guess it doesn't need to be, right? I mean, Player Display, today we're going to be talking about movies which you play on your TV, and you also display on the monitor, right? So, well, anyways, this channel's a nice place where you can experiment, try new things, see what works, see what doesn't, see what's fun, see what's outright boring. But one thing that I've always wanted to try and do, since I created this channel, and since I've ever considered that possibility of creating a YouTube channel, is doing the tried and true tier ranking system for, in this case, the Star Wars movies. And depending on how this works out, we're going to go ahead and maybe do Star Wars character rankings. We can rank other movie franchises, stuff like that. I mean, are those police sirens? I apologize for that. This is going to be very raw. There's not going to be a whole lot of edits, and it's not going to be very quick. This is going to be pretty lengthy, so I apologize if you want something that's a little bit shorter. This might not be for you. That's okay. But really, this is just meant for something to be played in the background if you're working on a project, you're just chilling, going to bed, getting a nice cup of joe, whatever it is. Then you can just listen to my horrible grizzled voice as I talk about some Star Wars movies. Right, I'm kind of adding this note in post. Now that I've recorded all the audio and the video, I think one thing that I might do is I will, instead of having video, I will just have still images of the tier list. So this is pretty much, I guess you could think of this as something of a podcast. Simply just something to listen to and just glance at whenever you want. There's not going to be a whole lot of visual stuff going on. I hope you're good with that. I just realized that as I was recording the videos, there's not a whole lot going on, so I don't want to beat the crap out of my computer by recording full 10-minute videos of a still basically unchanging image. So we're just going to have stills, but then when the tree changes, the tier list, then you'll see a change. So don't worry about that. This is mainly just to be listened to in the background, but when you want to see how the tier list is doing, then go ahead and give it another gander, and you'll see how everything's leveling up. My setup is a little bit awkward. I am recording on my laptop and using my phone as a microphone because the microphone on my computer is total crap, so we're just not even going to use that. But anyways, enough lollygaggling, let's just get right into it. I have no previous dispositions, no script, no thoughts I want to put out there straight away. I'm just going to eyeball these movies and rank them pretty much through the eyes of someone who is simply just watching the stuff and that's it. They don't know the deep lore, they don't know the comics, they don't know the video games. We're going to do our best to review each of these movies and shows objectively based on how well they succeeded at doing what they were trying to do. If they were trying to do anything. So I guess the only two things that I will mention before we go in is, first of all this is canon, so all this is post-Disney acquisition. Take that for what you will. So we're not going to be discussing the Clone Wars micro series, which is also very cool, but it's no longer canon, so it wouldn't fit in tandem with some of the extra material that we have here. And some of these shows are still ongoing, so it would be weird to kind of add in that extra expanded universe content into this ranking here. And secondly, I did rank, well, not rank, but I sorted these movies and shows prematurely. So as you can see here, I started with the original trilogy, of course. Then we're going to do the prequel trilogy. Then we're going to go ahead and do the sequel trilogy, the 2 anthology movies. Then we're going to do all the live action shows. Then we're going to go ahead and end with the animated shows and just see how it goes. Alright, so again, I apologize if there's going to be any background noise. I'm kind of just going to continue with my stream of thought, and hopefully everything pieces together well, and my phone will allow me to record all of this audio. But anyways, let's begin with the one that started it all, being Star Wars, or as it's also known as, Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. But no, this is just Star Wars, and then of course, as Empire Strikes Back and all the other ones came around, it had to be renamed, so that way people wouldn't get too confused with the continuity and the release order of everything. This is a very important movie, and it's also my favorite, not simply because this is the very first Star Wars movie I've ever seen, but it has a very important mission when it comes to world building, creating characters, creating aliens, vehicles, landscapes, planets. This Star Wars movie arguably had the biggest mission out of every piece of Star Wars content that we had in the future, because if this movie didn't do well, then none of the others could have ever possibly happened. It was meant to just be a flash in the pan. If it failed horribly, then not a big deal. If it worked, then it'd be like, oh, okay, that was cool. A nice little sci-fi romp from the 70s. Fun to watch. Watch it, and then we're done. But to everyone's surprise, except perhaps George Lucas, everyone fell head over heels for the thing, and then we got the Star Wars franchise that we know and love and hate today. So, yeah, again, the big thing for this movie is world building, very important. So, of course, for me, I remember the very first time I saw it, it was probably in kindergarten, maybe first grade. I was born in 99, by the way, if you want a good gauge as to where I'm coming from when approaching all these movies and TV shows. And as for New Hope, I remember I got home from school one day. I think my dad sat me down on the couch in the basement, because I pretty much grew up in a basement for my entire youth, and I don't remember how he introduced me to it. He kind of just said, hey, here's a movie, watch it. And strikingly enough, I remember watching my very first viewing of Star Wars. I remember seeing the droids walking on the Tantive 4. I think that's my very first memory. I remember being scared the crap out of by the Jawa jump scare and seeing Ponda Baba's arm lopped off in the cantina by Obi-Wan's lightsaber, or rather Ben Kenobi's lightsaber. And yeah, this is the movie that sticks to me the most like glue, for sure. But again, we're going to try and review all these objectively, how well they do, what they're trying to do. And this movie, it did everything spectacularly, I think. Of course, it's not the most complex movie, and I don't think it needs to be. It was meant to sort of be a borderline parody of movies that came around in the past. Like it has some Star Trek vibes in there. And then, yeah, it kind of harkens back to a whole bunch of influences. Like you have Seven Samurai, you have Western. It's very operatic. It has so many influences from genre films, TV shows, comics. I think Valerian was another one, French comic book, and a movie which unfortunately failed a lot harder than it should have. I loved that movie. We could talk about that one day if you really want to, but yeah, this movie was such a success, and I feel like it's underrated because they're always so focused on the movie that came after it, and because of that, they neglect to look at how amazing this movie was in terms of putting everything into place. Alright, I'm gonna shut up on that and actually go into the evidence. Of course, you have Luke Skywalker, who is the main hero of the first trilogy, and he's just a nobody, just an average kid, on a farm, no real story about him, just a citizen, a pedestrian pretty much. He doesn't know what's going on out there. Of course, you have that scene where he's looking out towards the binary sunset, wondering what else is going on out there. Can he be part of something bigger? And not only does George Lucas highlight this as his favorite scene in the entire franchise, but also much of what informed at least the first trilogy of Star Wars is Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, and basically what that was meant to do. I'm a philosophy major, so forgive my rambling, but effectively what Joseph Campbell's mission was to do is sort of show how there are very basic building blocks when it comes to telling the hero's story. So, of course, you start with the exposition. You got this kid on a Dust Bowl planet. He's farming moisture. It's Tatooine. There's no water. Water's a very key resource. And then he's kind of stuck with his kind of jaded Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, who really want nothing to do with the kind of just... Am I still recording? Okay, I'm so good. Again, I'm doing this on my phone, so it's a little bit weird, but... yeah, Luke is just a no one, as far as he knows at this point. And another thing that Joseph Campbell highlights is that eventually something happens to this hero character where they realize there is something else going on out there that they need to assess to or take part in. And literally what Luke says when the droids bring Leia's message to Ben Kenobi and himself is he says, I can't get involved, I have work to do. And then he's so sucked up in that little world that he's in. And then, of course, his folks get annihilated by the Empire. And then he says, well, the Jedi path, or at the very least saving the princess path, are all I have, so we gotta go on and do that. And then, of course, he goes to Tatooine, and then he goes to the Cantina, which is absolutely spectacular, and then you get the modal nodes playing the iconic Cantina track, which is absolutely lovely. I love the Cantina scene so much. That's probably my favorite scene in the entire franchise. Just in terms of a world-building standpoint, I think I value the sheer raw creativity more than actually progressing the plot. And in terms of creativity, this is where the movie succeeds the most. I mean, you get, of course, you get the spaceships, Tantive 4, and the Star Destroyer to start the movie, and then you get Tatooine, and then you hear a little bit about Alderaan, although you don't actually see it. I mean, you do see it, but at that point, it's kind of just in rubble. But yeah, it's just, I'm trying not to talk about one movie for too long, because we have a lot to get through, but yeah, this just laid out all the building blocks so well. I mean, you got Han Solo, you got your scruffy smuggler, you got his dog buddy, Chewbacca, and of course you have Princess Leia, who is one of the most kick-ass female roles that we've ever seen, not just during the time, but in all of cinema, and she was a really pivotal thing, and she's not a damsel in distress, at least not yet. When it gets to Jabba's palace, it gets a little bit weird, but we'll get to that. But she's a character who holds her own, and you have the two male roles go in and save her, and then one of the first words out of her mouth, someone has to save our skins. She grabs a gun, and she starts doing the job for them, and that is kind of comes out of left field from all the movies we've seen before that. And then, of course, you have Darth Vader, the best villain in all of cinema. I mean, objectively, it's very hard to argue against that statement. And of course, we don't know the father thing. George Lucas didn't know the father thing. He was just meant to be an imposing, at this point, one-dimensional antagonist, and he totally sold it. From the aesthetic to the voice of James Earl Jones. Everything was succeeded so well. It's pretty much a perfect movie, at least in my opinion. Of course, you can nitpick it. There's, again, you have a very limited team, Lucasfilm and all of that, and they were figuring out how to put this thing together with all the practical effects. I mean, ILM, I mean, it's kind of in the name, right? And it's just amazing that they were able to put so much together with so few resources and problem solve, and this was the result. And that's all I'm going to say about the movie. I mean, obviously, if you're watching this video, you've seen Star Wars. I mean, if you are a cinemaphile to any degree, then you had to have at the very least seen the very first Star Wars movie. Even if you hate it, it is such an important milestone for what cinema can be. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and give this an A. Hold on, are you moving? You're moving. Okay, so we're going to drop it right up there. I think that's right where it belongs. Solid A. And it's not necessarily meant to progress anything. It's simply meant to be an open and shut classic. It wasn't meant to be a franchise, but of course, the franchise continued on. So here we go. And now that probably brings us to the greatest heavyweight within the Star Wars pantheon, which most people highlight as their absolute favorite, and understandably so. We have The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars Episode 5. I guess it was Episode 2 for a time, right? But this was also a very big movie, and it had a very different job to do in comparison to A New Hope. Again, it's Star Wars, but I'm just going to call it New Hope, just because there are so many other movies and installments that kind of require us to give it that subtitle New Hope. So I apologize for that. Ugh, sorry, I'm a mess. But of course, while New Hope's mission was to create a galaxy, for Empire Strikes Back, it understands that we're here, we know this galaxy, we know of the Force, we know who the good guys are, we know who the bad guys are. Now we could just focus on a character study, being Luke Skywalker, discovering his lineage. I mean, that's kind of towards the end, but also learning about patience what it is to be not even necessarily a hero at this point, but just being a good person, having compassion, waiting for the right moment to do something good for yourself and for the people around you. And that's a test that comes to him in the form of course, Ben Kenobi's ghost, where he says, you need to go to the Dagobah system, your story needs to keep going. And of course, he stumbles upon Yoda, and he is a whole thing on his own, and pretty much, I'd argue that Yoda is one of the very few elements that is always consistent throughout all the installments. I mean, I'd also put him up there with the music. The music is always great. Yoda's dialogue, meanwhile, is always absolutely fantastic, no matter who's writing it. Every single thing he says is not only very important to the characters he's talking to, but also to us in real life. We quote him all the time. I mean, forget the backwards dialect that he speaks in, but it is always so prophetic and true to life. He's basically the infinite fortune cookie that keeps on giving, And he's very instrumental in teaching Luke that, yes, I know that you want to be part of this story, but then again, you're being naive. You gotta wait to understand where you belong in this very moment. You're not the great Jedi Knight that Ben Kenobi wants you to hopefully be one day, and perhaps I want you to hopefully be one day. You're still a kid. You still don't know what's out there. You still don't know the truth of who you are. And then, of course, that leads him to abandoning his training early. It's kind of up for debate for how long he was training for, but then, of course, he senses that his friends are in grave danger, and like any good friend would, he leaves in order to save them, and of course, he just winds up getting a hand lopped off, falling right into a trap, and then having the anvil dropped on his head that Darth Vader is his dad, who is basically the echo of Adolf Hitler within the Star Wars universe. I mean, that is the horrible, terrible person that inspired Darth Vader. And if you were to learn that one of the most evil people in human history was part of your lineage, that is devastating. So for Luke, this is like learning that a genocidal maniac is his dad. And what does that make Luke? What direction is he going to go in from this point? Is he going to be able to temper himself and those urges that led him to this horrible climax for his life control him? Is he going to teach himself to be better than his past? Or is he just going to repeat the past? And that's a really big question here. So, again, New Hope is meant for creating the world. Then you have Empire Strikes Back, here's the world, and then here is a progression for the story of who we initially thought was nobody within this world, and they did an absolutely phenomenal job. Again, the Star Wars New Hope, it could function as a standalone. Empire Strikes Back is what elicits the possibility that things can keep going, and if this movie failed, then there would be no more. I mean, if the I'm Your Father reveal was not handled well, or perhaps was not present at all, then maybe we wouldn't be as invested in seeing more. Maybe it just would have been 1 movie, 2 movies, that would be it. So, yeah, this was the most thematic and nuanced movie of all of them. The most intrinsic, self-reflective, and I wouldn't say this is my absolute favorite pinnacle of Star Wars. Again, that goes to New Hope for me. But objectively, this is what set the absolute highest bar as to what Star Wars is all about. It's about self-reflection, not calling the shots too soon, acknowledging your weaknesses before you go out and try to do something big. Luke let his ego get the better of him, and as a result of that, he put his friends in danger. And then he realized a massive truth about himself that he wasn't ready for. And that is something that we ourselves have. We learn things about ourselves sometimes very late in life, and even then we're not ready for it. And as a result of that, we have to go through a reality check. We need to slow down. And That's really what this movie is all about, amongst a whole bunch of other things. So, again, I'm going to try to keep it short each installment that we're talking about here. But Empire Strikes Back, for me, this is what sets the bar for what a Star Wars installment should be. So we are going to go ahead and give this the big ol' heralded S tier. I think that's where it belongs, and I don't think any other movie can match that. Alright, so this seems to be the part in my evening where things start to get a little bit noisy with the utilities that are activating around my apartment, so I apologize for that if there's any background at all. And by the way, I am making a pause between each of these installments just so I can take a breath, take some water and all that. And of course, as we're going through these movies, there's so many things that I'm omitting. I apologize for that. I mean, if you wanted to focus on one movie, you could talk for potentially days and never run out of things to discuss. So, again, the main goal of this list is to focus on how successful the movie was, not financially or appeasing the audience, but in terms of accomplishing what it wanted to do. So, all that being said, let's keep it going. So here we have Return of the Jedi, Episode 6, which should technically be Episode 3 when it was initially released. I'm curious what the posters looked like at the time. It was actually originally called Revenge of the Jedi, so this will be the third movie that we're looking at. And it is also a very good movie. I wouldn't say it's quite as strong as Empire or New Hope, but just barely so. It's still a very excellent watch. I think the only complaint that people have with this movie is the Ewoks, really. And it's kind of... I do not have an issue with Ewoks, I will say that. I know people despise them, and I get it, you know, they're very cute, they're kind of out of nowhere, and people also find it a little bit crazy that they're able to take on the Empire on their own, and that's a fair assumption. I mean, being someone who knows the lore a little bit better, to appease anyone with those questions, they actually do have a long-running history of fighting really big, like, Godzilla-sized beasts going through the woods and stuff like that. So they know how to take down big colossi that are bigger than them using the trees and the elements. So, at least for me now, knowing what I do, it's not a surprise that the Ewoks were able to at least cause trouble for the Empire. I think it was actually in some of the McQuarrie artwork where there were plans to have the Ewoks facing against the really gargantuan beasts that were roaming through the Ewok woodlands, but obviously that probably would have been a very big task to uphold, and there's only so many of George Lucas's ideas he could squeeze into a single movie. That man had, and still has, a lot going on in his head, I'm sure. So, that being said, Ewok debacle aside, it's... if you don't know the external lore, if you don't know the comics, you don't know the expanded universe, then yeah, that's a fair criticism to make, and that does kind of hurt the plot overall. But basically what this movie is trying to do is end the trilogy, which is a very big challenge, but I feel like all the loose ends that Empire had and left on purpose, they were all tied together very well. So let's do this by focusing on each of the main characters. So let's first start with Han Solo, who I feel like I should have been talking about a little bit more, because as I'm thinking about these movies, I'm starting to realize just how spectacular his character was. I mean, Harrison Ford, as much as he pretends to not care about the impact that he's left and how much people love him, his character of Han Solo is a lot more fascinating than I have realized. I mean, he has such a profound arc. When we first meet him, he's just a guy doing a job, he's evading the law, running away from Jabba, and he's probably scared at this point. He's I mean, he's in a block of carbonite at this point. He's nothing right now. And then he needs to be freed, and then of course before that he had his romance with Han and Leia. Is kind of a with Han or Leia. He had his romance with Leia. It was a big will they, won't they thing. And then, of course, she's the one who frees him from the carbonite. And then of course, at this point, it's no longer about the money. It's about not just the woman he loves, but also the community that he wants to see succeed against this horrible, oppressive empire. So, it's kind of interesting. They both kind of help each other. Han Solo becomes a general for the Republic. Well, the Rebellion. The Republic isn't established yet. And then Leia also, in a strange turn of events, kills Jabba, not only saving her own skin, but also taking Han Solo out of debt. So that is kind of a two birds, one stone situation. So their arcs come together beautifully, and I think, where Han absolutely hits his arc is at the very end of the movie where Death Star 2 blows up. And again, he doesn't know that Luke and Leia are siblings at this point. He says that if you want to be with Luke, then I won't get in the way. And then she says, Luke is my brother. And of course, they have a little bit of a chuckle, but that is such a big moment for this guy who only cared about the credits, who only cared about surviving. And that's what earned him so much. And that is why there's so many complaints that could be said about the sequels. Again, we're not talking about that at the moment. But for him, beautiful close to his story. And same for Leia. I'd actually say that her arc, sadly, was the weakest of the three. I really hate saying that because in Empire, you had Yoda saying, well, firstly, Ben said about Luke, he's our last hope, and then Yoda says, no, there is another, and pretty much everyone agrees that that is Leia. She is later learned to be the sister, but she doesn't do that much in relation to redeeming Darth Vader. I mean, a little bit, I suppose. Like, Vader's last words to Luke were, tell your sister you were right about me and all that, but she herself never really faced Vader after the events of Empire. So I feel like she could have had a little bit more insurgence within the Skywalker arc here. But in terms of her play with Han Solo, she definitely helped to fulfill that role, show him that you're smart, you're better than this, you can be fulfilling a bigger purpose, which he does, and he realizes it's not all about the credits, about the love of his life and the family that he's building. And she does a better job at helping his arc to come full circle, I think. And kind of my headcanon is that when Yoda says, no, there is another, perhaps, maybe he was not talking about Leia. Maybe he was talking about Anakin. Perhaps he has this inkling that Anakin can come back out of Darth Vader, and Luke is that hand, funny mentioning hands when it comes to Skywalkers, but he's that hand that can reach out and pull that shell of a man out from this machine. And I guess that's a good segue into their arcs. And of course, by this point, it's so cool to see Luke go on this side quest with his friends. He is now full-on Jedi, the first Jedi we've seen since Yoda and Ben died, and now he's very well composed. People have complained he acts a little bit too stoic, and I get that, but again, he's acting in accordance with his teachings. He's no longer this fussy kid. He's almost made it. He is up there. He's getting there. And then, of course, when he finally meets Yoda on his deathbed, Yoda says, your final task is with, quote-unquote, defeating Vader, which I see more as perhaps it was him saying you might actually redeem him, in contrast to what I believed would be the outcome. So, and of course, he goes ahead and he manages to do that. And it's fascinating because in Empire, when we last saw these characters, it was Vader having the upper hand. Again, more hands with Skywalkers. But now Luke has the upper hand. He says, I know who you are. I feel the good in you. Let me help you. And ultimately, that culminates with Vader destroying the Emperor, who's a whole other thing, and saving his boy with his last 5 minutes of life, pretty much. And then, of course, that last arc is with Darth Vader, who is the main character of Star Wars. No Anakin and no Vader. There's no story to tell. Luke isn't important. He is the new hope for Vader, his son. And then you see Vader become so much more than he ever thought he could be. He thought he was a lost cause. He was just a puppet for Palpatine, for Sidious, whatever you'd like to call him at this point. And then when Luke pleads to him, "Father, please," he realizes this is his moment to redeem all the horrible monstrosities he has done in the past. Of course, we're not too privy to everything that he has done at this point. The prequels and the Clone Wars show did a better job with that. But you're still able to assume that this is the bad guy, you know, Darth Vader. He's probably killed a lot of people. He's probably destroyed a lot of planets. So for something as simple as a son's pleading to be all that it takes for him to come around is so fascinating. He is no longer, in that moment, Darth Vader, the warlord, the monster, the ghost that haunts the galaxy. He is a dad. He is a hero. And he's able to do that through the simple action of giving his life to ensure that Palpatine cannot persist any further and cause more harm to the galaxy. So he gives his life and he takes off his helmet in what I think is objectively one of the best moments in all of Star Wars. Just him removing his helmet, removing the mask, removing the helmet. That is such a trope now in Star Wars, in cinema, really. And this is one of those few times where I feel like there was so much meaning to it. It was so important. But anyways, we're hitting 10 minutes on the audio for this movie. But yeah, not as great as these two, I wouldn't say. But still a fantastic movie. I would never call it bad by any capacity. It did what it wanted to do, perhaps not to the greatest height that people would have preferred, but it worked. It did a great job. I'm going to go ahead and give it an A as well. It's a little bit laggy, but we're going to put it below New Hope, which is fine. That's not a big deal. I just think New Hope was more successful in the terms of being super, super creative. I guess I notched down Return of the Jedi simply because I wish Leia had a little bit more as opposed to getting Han to where he was. She did such a good job with everything, of course. Carrie Fisher, you can never deny her performance, of course. But that's really the only thing that puts Return of the Jedi below New Hope for me, simply because I wish Leia had more. Again, the Ewoks, I never really had too big of a deal with them. And again, it's such a vast galaxy. You're going to have weird creatures, you're going to have ugly creatures, you're going to have cute creatures, so I'm personally fine with that. That was never a distraction to me. But anyways, there is my analysis of Return of the Jedi. Now it's time that we get into some literal Bantha Poodoo, which is being Phantom Menace, Episode 1. This movie came out, I believe, the year I was born, so I was not really there. I was alive, but I was not coherent to see the impact this movie had on the franchise. People were very hyped for it. The merch was everywhere. The promotion was crazy. It was a huge, huge deal, and of course, it disappointed many, many people, and many consider it to be the worst Star Wars movie of all time. And it's very understandable. It is very radically different. It is littered with CGI. There are many questionable performances. It just feels like a whole different world altogether. And yeah, this movie has a lot of problems, and it's focusing on all the trade, which was really weird, with, like, economy and stuff, which, I guess for a particular Star Wars fan is kind of cool, but, ironic for, a movie based on aliens, but for this movie, it was very alienating to a lot of people, because it had such a radical shift in genre, in introductions, and it's just a really odd film, and also because it occurred before the Clone Wars, before the prospect of clones was even brought up. I mean, of course, clones were actually mentioned as far back as New Hope, which is really cool, but there were no clones in The Phantom Menace, so it was kind of an extra story, kind of a prologue to a prologue, if you will. I mean, clones and Clone Wars are what informs the two movies that would happen afterwards, along with what is heralded as one of the greatest TV shows in cartoon history, which we'll talk about a little bit later, ways down the road, down the road. But By the way, when we get to the TV shows, I'll be a little bit shorter. The movies are going to be the big focus here. But for Phantom Menace, for me, I enjoyed it as a kid. I mean, obviously. When I watched the original trilogy, of course I loved that. And I remember my dad presented to me that classic big 6-movie set emblazoned in gold of all the 6 Star Wars movies at the time. And I'm looking at the box art, I'm like, whoa, that's young Obi-Wan. Wait, who's that? And my dad's like, oh, that was Obi-Wan's master. And I'm like, whoa, that's so cool. So, of course, as a kid, I loved it. I thought it was really fun and really different. Then I grew up, and then I started to see past the veil, develop my own opinions, and see the warpath it left behind. And man, yeah, I got a lot of contrasting opinions on this. Of course, the greatest offender in this movie was Jar Jar Binks. It's impossible to talk about this movie and not mention Jar Jar. Yeah, he was a mistake. But again, we're talking about the intent of these movies, and when it comes to George Lucas, I feel a little bad for the guy. Like, he knew that people loved this great story that he was telling, especially coming off of the 3 main movies, and he only had good intentions. He wanted to do something cool for the kids. He wanted to create more nostalgia, more memories, and he got really excited about the new innovations in CGI, which he did not have for the original trilogy. I'm sure that if he could go back, he'd go ahead and put CGI into the original movies, which, well, he did. There were special editions of those movies. So I don't blame George Lucas at all for the prequels and what they were. He just got really excited, had a little bit too much creative control. He perhaps didn't ask enough questions to his creative team, and ultimately all 3 of the movies were messy in some regard. But let's focus again on the objective of episode 1, and it's kind of just a basic origin story for Vader, being Anakin Skywalker in this case, baby Anakin pretty much, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, those are pretty much the 2 characters we're focused on, and Obi-Wan doesn't get a lot to do. Ewan McGregor, he's fantastic, and he only gets better with every time you see him in the movies, and he's very good here, but he does not have a whole lot to do. Like, when Qui-Gon Jinn goes out of his way to find Anakin, of course to repair Amidala's ship and all of that, Obi-Wan is kind of AWOL. We don't see a whole lot from him, we don't get development from him, nor a lot of dialogue, and then of course, that leads us to Anakin, and a lot of people give him flack. Jason Lloyd, right? Christopher Lloyd. My brain's everywhere right now. I apologize. You know what? Let me do a quick search. Hold on a minute. Wait, what am I doing? Hold on. Jake Lloyd. There we go. Okay, I'm sorry about that. No offense there. But I don't blame the actor at all. He's a kid. I think he did a very good job at playing a kid. It's just that the lines that he got kind of hindered him a little bit. So I don't blame him at all. I think the script is one of the greatest offenders, especially for Natalie Portman. She's known as being one of the greatest actresses in the modern age. And if you want proof that there is a very janky script behind this movie, then look no further than Padme Amidala. George Lucas took a very wonderful actress and gave her very hammy and stinted and robotic lines that just felt very strange, and that will continue into the next 2 movies, absolutely. So, this movie's mission, in conclusion, introduce us to these characters who we kind of already knew. I guess the most monumental thing that it did was, first of all, give us young versions of Anakin, Obi-Wan, and also we met Mommy Skywalker for the first time, which was a really big deal. And we also got Darth Maul, who was kind of a total nothing character. He was just a grunt at the end of the day. He was all over the merch, but all he did really was die. And again, we're not talking about the TV show yet, so as far as we're concerned at this point in history, really cool guy, but overhyped, gets cut in half, and that's all. and then he kills Qui-Gon Jinn, which is a lot more symbolic when you really think about it, but only when we get into later movies and then the TV shows. So that's just to be taken with a grain of salt for now. So as for where we'll rank this movie, again, I kind of forgive it personally. I like the soundtrack. For me, it's kind of a guilty pleasure. I'm not totally outright offended by this film. Again, I understand it. I forgive it. I sympathize with George Lucas's plight. I don't think it shatters Star Wars as a lot of people said it did. Yeah, this is a tough one. I'm going to give it a D. Come on, cursor. There we go. I'm going to give it a D. It tried its best. And then, by the way, all these movies are subject to change. If we bring in other movies and we realize things seem to be flopped out, then we could do that too. It tried its best to do something. It wanted to be humble. It wanted to give something to Star Wars fans. And unfortunately, what it gave is not what people wanted. It was a very different vision of what the Star Wars galaxy could look like, and it's not what people wanted, and I get that. It was a little bit too uppity, it was a little too shiny, especially the CGI. I'm not a CGI fan, I always like the practical effects, but yeah, story-wise, it was just kind of, here it is. It didn't feel like it was meant to be going anywhere. It kind of lacked a mission, so that's kind of where I gotta put this movie. I don't hate it. I just feel like the elements are there. They just weren't flexed out to do what they were meant to do in the right capacity. So, unfortunately, I gotta drop it to D. Okay, and that brings us to Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, which is pretty much unanimously said to be the worst Star Wars movie of all time. And for me, I actually don't agree with that. I think there are some really good elements that are buried within it, but unfortunately they're overshadowed by a very shoddy romance that felt very forced, felt very wooden, and is arguably one of the worst pairings that we've ever seen in cinema. And I guess I'll first start off with saying that, of course, this is our introduction to Hayden Christensen within Star Wars. I don't believe he is a bad actor. I actually think he's good. He has some really great moments in both of his movies that where the script is actually decent. He does a very strong job. Like, at one point he says, of course it's played for laughs, but when he goes on to that monologue of how he slaughtered the Sand People who killed his mother, he said how he killed the men and the women and the children too. Yeah, it's a meme, I know, but he did a very good job at showing himself as a kid who knew he should be better than this. He's a Jedi. I mean, that's exactly what he said. And it was really heartbreaking to see someone who's not Vader yet, just a kid, and he just murdered all these people who are a family. You know, Tuskens, as horrible as they are, they're still family. They still have culture. They still have children. And this is coming from a kid who just lost his mom, and he's now an orphan. And the Jedi are kind of his family, although he's still at odds with them. I mean, Mace Windu always gives him trouble and gives him flack. And Obi-Wan still gets pissed at him at times, so I guess that's another layer we could see here. So there are still strong moments in this movie, I think, but again, the writing, I think, is the biggest culprit between Natalie Portman, who's already a very well-seasoned actress, and Hayden Christensen, who at the time wasn't very well known. Well, this is pretty much his claim to fame, in air quotes, but he could only do whatever he could with what little he had, and unfortunately it was George Lucas having full control of the script. But all that being said, the story, the idea, is actually really cool. I love the idea of how you had this very naive and impulsive warrior falling head over heels for a politician. There's something that feels very Shakespearean about that. I really like that idea. And then you have this overarching conflict of kind of this very old, ancient order of warriors now being forced to get on their feet because there is a greater galactic threat coming in. That's a really cool idea. And then you have this mysterious army that's being built from a man of who is notorious for being a dangerous bounty hunter, being Jango Fett. And then you have Obi-Wan's side quest to kind of go in and figure out how this military came to be. And I actually like that. I think the dialogue in those moments where he's on Kamino, where he's having that very passive-aggressive conversation with Tamora Morrison portraying Jango, I thought those were really cool moments. It felt very film noir to me. I feel like that's very underrated. So I thought Obi-Wan's story within this film was actually pretty cool. I actually liked where he wound it up. And then, of course, eventually he becomes a captive of Dooku, who is the fallen student of Qui-Gon, kind of. He taught Qui-Gon, as Tales of the Jedi would inform us much later on more about, and that made it a lot more interesting. But again, that didn't happen yet, so we're not going to talk about that right now. But that was kind of interesting to see that dynamic between Obi-Wan and the master of his master, and to see that he fell to the dark. Again, very good idea, but not well executed in that Dooku kind of just gets shoehorned in there. Like, suddenly he just apparates. He exists all of a sudden. And for an audience where we just saw another Sith Lord get chopped down, of course that was Darth Maul, and then we have this other new guy, and we're like, wait a minute, so who are we supposed to be caring about? Who should we be invested in? Whose story is continuing, kind of? And it felt very odd, especially for me as a kid. I felt like that was very weird. All that being said, Christopher Lee, he did a very good job. He always acts great. Rest his beautiful soul. As for the character, very cool, very enigmatic. There was definitely a spookiness, especially with John Williams' score that I really liked. I keep forgetting to talk about John Williams. Again, he's always consistent. He's a given. Whenever John Williams is on board, he sells it. He does such a great job. But yeah, then you get, of course, the Geonosis battle, which is a big deal. The clones are deployed for the very first time. Then you get the duel between, of course, you get Obi-Wan and Anakin, which is huge, versus Dooku. They both get KO'd. And then Yoda takes out his green saber, which it didn't occur to me until recent years that must have been a crazy, mind-boggling moment for people who were first watching that movie. Let me know in the comments, if you were one of the first people to see that film, how did that moment feel? Because I kind of want to know. Like, Yoda being that slow little old guy from the original movies, suddenly doing all those acrobatic stunts with the saber, that must have been really cool, or really repulsive. I wasn't there. I'd like to know how you felt about that. But that must have been a very big and pivotal moment for Star Wars. But yeah, that's pretty much my take on Attack of the Clones, and really kind of for the prequel trilogy in general. Really great ideas, just not very well executed. Especially for the antagonist route. Like, we thought Maul was going to be the big bad in Phantom Menace. Now he's dead. Now we have Count Dooku, who's introduced, like, past the halfway point of the movie, I believe, and he's kind of just there. So it doesn't feel like we have a definitive antagonist. I mean, yes, we have Palpatine kind of working in the background, but it's kind of neither here or there. He kind of pops up when he needs to pop up, but he doesn't become a true villain, and we don't really understand his plan until Revenge of the Sith, which we're just about to get into. So this movie doesn't feel like it has an actual force fighting against the main heroes. I mean, you have the CIS, you have the droids and all of that, but they are always expendable. They never feel like they're a danger at all. They're cut through so easily all the time, and there's a point to that, of course. The prequels are a giant chess match, basically Palpatine playing against himself, just putting these teams against each other in a horrible death match until he eventually comes out on top. It's basically that Pixar short, Jerry's Game. But yeah, again, to conclude Attack of the Clones, I love the story, I love the idea, but the pacing, the script, kind of just a brand new villain who kind of comes out of nowhere. As good as he is, he's kind of unannounced, and it makes it a little bit messy. However, I will say it had a mission that felt like it was going into a greater narrative. So objectively, I'm actually going to put this higher than Phantom Menace. Not because it was a better movie, I don't think it was, but I will go ahead and put it above it in the C rank, because I felt like there was a better story in there. Even if you say that it was a worse movie than Phantom Menace, which I agree with, I think the story was better. It's more interesting. Like, if you're sitting around a campfire and telling the story, it's more intriguing. There's more to look at. There's more curiosity. For Phantom Menace, it was kind of just a whole lot of one-off stories that no longer mattered. Like, the pod racing scene was cool. It didn't lead to much in the grand scheme of things. The duel with Darth Maul was very cool, but he died and then Qui-Gon died. So, like, what was the point of either of those characters if that's the only movie where they're going to show up? Why not just have Obi-Wan and that's it? You know, there's kind of no point to them after that. So, yeah, I'm going to put Attack of the Clones over Phantom for that reason. But anyways, that is the second of this trilogy. Okay, so now that brings us to what is considered a massive fan favorite among Star Wars fans, which is Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And this is pretty much the movie where shit got real for the first time since Empire Strikes Back, I would argue. Order 66. This is perhaps the biggest moment in the galaxy's history. You have the Jedi Order doing their thing, protecting people, basically being space police. And then all in an instant, they're all dead. And that basically is the moment which informs New Hope. This is the most important prequel. Easy. You could probably drop Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and just watch Phantom Menace. And just watch Revenge of the Sith and be fine, because this movie is so significant. It is definitely the best story of the prequels, and one of the best stories in Star Wars history. Definitely not the best movie, I don't think, but it is very pivotal. It changes everything, and it's wild to see Palpatine's plan to start to come together, and then you see all of his worst enemies get killed in one fell swoop. You see Mace Windu die. You see Yoda defeated and exiled. You see Anakin, who was seen as a really huge hero for the Republic, destroyed and then turned into Palpatine's peasant. Everything falls into Palpatine's lap, and it is terrifying and amazing at the same time. And that was just an absolute standout moment. I mean, that was the purpose of this movie, to show, like, when you have Luke being so curious as to who are the Jedi in New Hope, and he has no idea really who they are, what the Force is. This movie is why. People don't know who the Jedi are because they are all dead. People don't talk about them. They think they're an old wives' tale, basically. They think they are a myth because they're gone. There are no Jedi to see anymore. And you can kind of think about that. Here I go with those philosophical tangents again. You can compare that to real-world history, where you have, like the Egyptians, you had, like, Anubis and Ra and all those stories from Greek mythology and stuff like that. Of course, they're all myths, but at the same time, you weren't there. You didn't see it. Maybe those crazy deities were there. I highly doubt it personally, but when all records are annihilated, or there are no records to speak of, then who are you to say whether or not they were there to begin with? So there really is a fascinating air to Revenge of the Sith. And as for the movie itself, I think it is good. It is definitely the best of the prequels. I think it is the best acting. It has the best acting. It has the best script. It has some of the best moments. It's also the most memed, but that's neither here nor there. It's just a fun thing. But Hayden Christensen, I think he was very much improved. I think he got a much better script. I think he himself as an actor did a lot better. Even with the cornier lines, I think he did a better job at invoking that anger, that confusion. I loved how he sought console with Yoda and Obi-Wan. I mean, the writing could have still been better, but those are still good character moments that I feel like future movies lacked, and I really appreciated them. I'm kind of hopping around here. Let's also talk about General Grievous. Again, we have another villain who kind of just shows up out of nowhere. and for those of you who haven't seen the Clone Wars microseries, which is many people, and that's fine, he first appeared in a cartoon after Attack of the Clones, and he was kind of meant to be the droid general. So basically, if you weren't a kid who was watching Cartoon Network and you were seeing the movies, this guy kind of just walked in, "What is the situation?" And you're like, wait, who is this coughing Terminator looking thing, you know? So it was just very awkward for viewers. It was awkward for me as a kid too. I thought he looked really cool, and I'm like, wait, who is this guy? What's his importance? Why does he have all these lightsabers that don't belong to him? Again, the expanded universe makes him so much more interesting. I actually really like Grievous, but only because of things that occurred. Why did I become British for a minute? That occurred after this movie, outside of this film. But as he was in the movie, he was just a side quest. He was just something for Obi-Wan Kenobi to pursue. He was cool. I liked his voice. His design was neat. Maybe a little bit overkill for the Star Wars aesthetic, at least for the time. But yeah, he didn't really mean much for Star Wars and the plot. You know what? I retract that. He was actually important in that he was a precursor. He and Maul and Dooku were all precursors to Anakin becoming Darth Vader. All these three were very powerful individuals who had the potential to become great heroes. Dooku and Grievous in particular were very great heroes for a time, and then Palpatine managed to corrupt and bend them to his will, and then he just went through them like candy. They were expendables. They were just stepping stones to him to get to Anakin. And then Grievous, he was also a very big war hero who was destroyed and then turned into a cyborg who couldn't think for himself. So he was a very important piece of foreshadowing for what Anakin would become, and that's a very big deal. So, and then, unfortunately, again, we're moving on to another tangent here. Padme has nothing to do. She's just pregnant and doing nothing for the entire movie, really, and her dialogue is not improved at all. It makes no sense to me. Like, I think, yeah, when Anakin says that he's feeling lost, she says, "Lost? Why is that?" And then it kind of goes into this thing where he says, "I'm so in love with you," and then she says, "So love has blinded you?" And that entire dialogue made no sense to me, so that was mind-bogglingly strange. I didn't get that at all, but yeah, it was a total mess. And then, I guess one final moment I'll mention, well, I mean, of course, you get the whole Mustafar fight. There's a lot to talk about this movie. A lot happens that is very important. There are a lot of moments that matter in this film. That's what I'm trying to say. But you get the dialogue about Darth Plagueis. Again, meme to death, but very fascinating to see Palpatine effectively groom Anakin with this story of old to become this pawn of his next piece on the chessboard, if you will. And that story kind of coerces him, changes his point of view, and not only that, but appraises points of view that he already had. He was always shaken with the Jedi. He always thinks that things could have been done differently to save people in a better way, and he commits to those thoughts, and Palpatine is the one who tips him over the fence with his story of Plagueis and how if not Luke, he's not born yet. If Anakin is to change the way that he acts and divert from the Jedi way, he can save a person that he loves. And arguably, that might be the better thing to do. And that translates to real life. There are things that we have convictions and rules and devotions to faith that we always want to adhere by, but then we have these new things that come into our lives that we also want to protect and save, and as a result of that, we have to sacrifice a part of ourselves in order to do that. And of course, we see Mustafar and what happens there. He winds up more or less killing Padme in pursuit of this power, and then destroying himself. And then at the end of the day, he has nothing left except Palpatine. He is in checkmate. All he can do is whatever Palpatine says, and he knows he messed up bad. And that is such a shattering moment in the entire saga. And that's another moment that I feel like could have been one of the best Star Wars moments in history. Like when Palpatine says that in your anger you killed Padme, and he screams the infamous no, which is absolutely terrible. It would be so simple to fix this moment so it could be an amazing moment. If Vader just yelled out a horrifying, painful scream, not a word, a scream, that would just be shattering to the character and to the audience to show that we've been watching this hero try his best to be the best that he could be, but then you had all the conspiracy, you had him falling in love, you had him losing the people he loved throughout his life, and then all these moments corner him into this realization that everything he loved is dead and it's almost all his fault, and he has no way out except to become a horrible, horrible human being. So if he just simply screamed in that one moment, I might actually put this movie higher as one of my favorites. But, okay, so that's pretty much all I could say about the movie. I mean, again, with any of these movies, we could keep on going, but objectively, did it do a good job telling the story that it wanted to tell? It could have been better in a lot of places. It could have ironed out a few kinks, but overall, I think it was very, very good. I really loved Anakin's dynamic. Again, I loved his little conversations. I really loved his last exchange with Obi-Wan before Mustafar, like where Obi-Wan actually praises him for being the knight that he is. And he says that there's a future for you. You're learning. You're doing a good job. That makes it all the more painful when Anakin does fall. So it's really the character moments that carry this movie for me. Not as much the bombastic battles. But yeah, so it's a story pretty well told. Could have been better, but it was good. I will go ahead and give it a pretty confident B ranking. I'm going to drop it right there. Actually, a lot of people highlight this as their favorite Star Wars movie of all time, and I see that. I get it. It's such a big moment in Star Wars. And then you have Order 66, which is redone so many other times in other Star Wars media, which really speaks to how understated it is here. There's so many other things happening throughout the galaxies that's transpiring. But yeah, it's a good movie. It's a very good movie. I like it a lot. I think a lot of people who grew up with the original movies, I highly recommend they give it one more look, honestly. I mean, obviously, if you hate the prequels that came before it, that's fine. But for those of you who grew up with the original trilogy, give Revenge of the Sith one more try, because there are some really interesting moments in there that I think are very valuable to the Star Wars loving experience.